We got a great evening planned for y'all. We're going to be talking for about an hour with two extraordinarily gifted tech ecosystem builders before I do the formal introductions. But I just want to take a moment, I think a little bit of a shout out to Douglas Jamal, Paul Milstein, and Sean Heininger for the amazing job that they've done restoring this building. Unbelievable. Douglas comes into Buffalo on Tuesdays, but I know he's aware of it and he's super excited this event's happening here. It was about a year and a half ago, right, Eric, that we had the first judging session in 2019 for our last 43 North event. They were vacuuming these seats 10 minutes before it started. I also want to give a shout out to 43 North. Again, another great job organizing an event. Let's give them a round of applause. Great job to the 43 North team. So I'm getting old. I got big cards here. These guys have a lot to offer. I want to make sure I stay on point. Today is an opportunity for us to kind of assess where we are, to learn, and I think to plan to some degree for the future. So excited to have you both here to have the conversation. Let's get started. Furthest from me on my left is Eric Reich, well known to many people here. Eric is currently the chairman of 43 North. He's the co-chairman, correct, of the Regional Economic Development Council. He's a board member of TechBuffalo, and he's a board member of the 43 North Foundation. Co-founder of Campus Labs, and which he sold, I think, 3 times. Well, none of us really know, but he sold it a bunch of times. Eric, welcome. It's great to have you here. Mike Langellier is a software executive and entrepreneur. He is the genuine tech ecosystem builder. He's currently the president and CEO of TechPoint, which is a tech ecosystem accelerator. You do all things that accelerators do, I assume. Formerly the co-founder and CEO of MyJibe, acquired by MX in late 2011. And you joined TechPoint in 2012. Married to a beautiful wife, and you have 3 boys. Welcome to Buffalo. It's great to have you here.
Thank you.
So listen, we'll just get some, let's just get the Buffalo Bills stuff out of the way. We're sorry about the beatdown you guys took last year. I assume you're an Indianapolis fan, and welcome to quarterback purgatory.
Eric got me to yes, fortunately, before that game.
Carson Wentz,
I don't know if the answer would have been the same.
What's your prediction on Carson Wentz, Eric? Have you consulted with Justin?
Dicey.
Okay. Well, we'll see what happens. So anyway, I want to get started. Eric, just what prompted you at this time to consider getting Mike into Buffalo to have a conversation?
Well, one of the things that was interesting about running Campus Labs is that there are literally colleges all over the country, and as a result, I spent significant time in almost every major American city. And as I travel, there would be commonalities around the cities that appeared to be the most vibrant or the most prosperous or sort of have the most street life or action that really felt like it was a up and coming strong city. And what I realized as I started repeating and going to these different communities is that the cities that were really well organized around technology were the ones that seemingly had all of those attributes. And when I talk about organizing around technology, I don't mean prioritizing tech companies at the expense of all other companies, but everyone knows now that every company is a technology company to some degree, and they have technology people that help those companies grow and maintain their position and look for new positions in their markets. So those cities that were prioritizing creating of tech jobs, creating a tech economy were the ones that really seemed to be strong because tech people and tech economies have a different sort of needs that are normally associated with what you'd want to see in a city. Tech people have typically high wages compared to their educational background in most other comparative places. They require placemaking. They want downtown housing, sometimes not even with a car, and quality public transportation and clean tech and all these things that when you add them up, they make for a really, really strong quality of life and a really strong economic profile for a city. And Indianapolis was one of those cities that I really noticed immediately when I was there. It had a small group of entrepreneurs that were astonishingly locked into creating a tech economy in Indy. And every time I'd go there would be something new to see. There would be a new company that was in the news, and they were doing an incredible job. And after a couple visits to Indy, and shortly after I left Campus Labs, I said, I'm actually going to, go back to my roots and cold call the Indianapolis people who are making this happen and see what I can learn. And I did that and had a number of conversations. And eventually I was led to Mike. And they said, if you really want to understand the DNA of how this all happened in Indianapolis, if you really want to understand how this all worked, you should really talk to Mike, because he has been instrumental in helping create it, helping maintain it, and bring it to that place. So I got introduced to Mike, and I was very assertive in trying to convince him to help us, because I thought there was a lot that we could learn from him, because seemingly they've done a lot right, but what you don't see is probably the things that they've done wrong or miscalculated on. And I thought that we could save a lot of time and energy if we knew some of those things up front. So luckily, Mike was willing to accept the challenge.
So that's great, Eric. So I would have to imagine, just given your experience and your success, that you get asked to do this all the time. So I guess my first question is, why'd you say yes? Why'd you come?
Well, first, for those of you that know Eric,
that's why we're asking. Why did you come? We do know Eric pretty well, actually.
Eric had a lot to do with it. But I think part of it was timing. I think from a TechPoint developmental standpoint, from a personal capacity standpoint, timing work where I could even think about kind of popping my head out of the work that we were doing in Indianapolis. But I think more importantly, through doing the work that we're doing in Indianapolis and through TechPoint, I've learned what the key ingredients that have to be in place before a place is ready to do this kind of work, or to even have a good shot of being able to do so successfully. And as Eric and I talked, I saw that many of those ingredients are here. And so I think even though I've had cities and states from all across the country that have reached out and asked, hey, we're told about TechPoint, and we're told that we need a TechPoint here, and ask how we can do this. Those ingredients weren't there in many of those places that I heard that were here. And so specifically, I'll list off some of those key ingredients, because it's really a kudos to this community and to the assets that are here that's a sign of readiness. One of them is you need committed pillar employers. And the building that we're in is evidence of that, and the community commitments that M&T is making with other employers as well. You need emerging, successful scale-up stage companies, kind of startup and scale-up stage companies. Eric told me about ACV and their growth and success, and how that can kick off then generational successes. You need strategic funding. And so the state's investment and other organizations' investment into this organization to help get it off the ground, and to be able to think over a longer time horizon than just this year, but to think about the impact that it wants to make. And then you need momentum and a community that believes. And as Eric told me the story about all the parts, all the pieces that are coming together, and the genuine feeling that this is possible and this is possible here now, that is something that is intangible, but it is critical. And I heard about how that palpable feeling was here as well. And then lastly, you need a committed core of enthusiastic and also convincing individuals that can make it happen, and have the credibility, the personal credibility, to get other influencers and decision makers to get on board and to move along. And I saw that first in Eric, and I've seen it in a group of the board members and other community leaders here as well, that is assembled too. And so to me, it was the right recipe of ingredients coming together at the right time that showed the signs that this has the possibility to go.
That's great. Let's level set a little bit. I just want to start out. Just tell us a little bit in 1 minute or less about TechPoint. What is it? I'd like to run some parallels to what you're doing at TechBuffalo, Eric. So can you just give us a little background on that?
So TechPoint's a nonprofit that was started by the tech industry, specifically CEOs of some of the kind of early generations of software companies in and around the region, because it was an industry that didn't there wasn't a lot of connective tissue. There wasn't a real good awareness of what this industry is and who's part of it, and there wasn't a convening function to bring these individuals together and help form a community. So that was sort of TechPoint 1.0. When I came in, was sort of at the 1.0 to 2.0 transition, and I was coming out of being a tech entrepreneur myself, and I was compelled and convicted, I think similar to how Eric is, about I love growing companies and growing products, but I was compelled about the potential to and the opportunity to, for a stint of my career, grow a place, and how I had seen that there were generations of impact in the community where Indianapolis became a racing, known for speed and racing, became known for sports, and how I was convinced that in its next incarnation it should be known for tech, and that I could and should do something about it. And so getting back to kind of your question about what TechPoint is, we've now transformed the organization into an organization that does a few key things. It supplies talent, it builds community, it supports scale-ups, it platformizes the tech community, and I can elaborate if you like about what that means, but platformizes the tech community. And then most recently, we've even gotten into attracting jobs and employers from other places here as well. So we've built an organization that does that, and helps to catalyze and accelerate the provision of those resources in order to help the ecosystem grow.
Yeah, I'd love to know more about that recruitment process. So Eric, just I know it's still in its infancy, but talk to us about TechBuffalo for those who don't really know in the audience what you're all trying to build there.
Well, we're trying to build essentially what TechPoint has built in Indianapolis successfully, and that's the reason why this roadmap is going to be, so instructive and so helpful. I look back to my time, growing Campus Labs as a young entrepreneur, without the resources that a TechPoint would have in a community, the connective tissue of tying together employers to people looking for a job, to professional development, to education. Like, none of that stuff existed. And I look back and it's, a miracle that we were able to figure it out and actually do things in our community and recruit and make a name for ourselves both locally and nationally without advocacy and without assistance and without the type of support that a TechPoint could bring. And, now that I look that we have some of these, fundamental pieces that are necessary for us to grow going forward, we need to add the infrastructure and the assistance that'll allow these companies to grow. And I'm not just talking about the companies that I like to grow along with Mike, which are the early stage companies that need early stage talent, or the scale-ups like ACV that are growing really fast and trying to find people at breakneck speed. I'm also talking about corporations. Like, I think it's a huge statement by M&T that they had the confidence to invest and grow here. Do other companies have that degree of confidence? You need to ask them, but I don't want to leave it to doubt. I want people to feel like companies of all sizes can find the talent and the assistance that they need to get to the next stage, because that's what's going to enable this area to grow and regenerate.
And your funding, funding vehicles are all philanthropic mostly, correct? Or industry? Who supports the two organizations, TechPoint and TechBuffalo?
So in TechPoint's case, TechPoint, its first funding model was essentially passing the hat to employers, tech organizations, sponsoring organizations that wanted to be in and around the tech community. And it was that model that, as I came into the role, coming from the tech community into this role, I realized this isn't going to be strategic enough, and it's not going to be sustainable enough. And that's one of the things that has, always been one of those critical ingredients, and why the grant, the funding that came from the state to help beget TechBuffalo, why that perked my ears up, because it allows an organization to kind of really assess what does this community need me to be, not just what does this sponsor need me to be. And that's a really important distinction that plays out on a day-to-day basis. And so now the way that TechPoint sits today, we, like TechBuffalo, have a 501c3 foundation and a 501c6 partnership organization. And now we're evenly balanced. From a funding perspective, we have multi-million-dollar philanthropic grants. We have partnerships with the state. And then we also have a significant budget that's coming from tech employers and sponsoring organizations around the community.
That's fantastic. And the same roadmap? Well,
that's ideally is where we want to get to. Yeah. I think that the corporate and employer apparatus, is, needs to come a little later, as we've learned from Mike, and start to understand what that needs to look like, so we're not constantly changing course and reinterpreting where we want to go. But the head start that we got from ESD and also, from the Wilson Foundation, and, this community continues to be, the beneficiary of that, extraordinary set of circumstances and that extraordinary gift from Ralph Wilson. But, the state has seen that programs of this kind and this type have the potential to change perceptions, but also change what's happening here on a day-by-day, month-by-month, year-by-year basis. And, 43 North is a great example of that. It was an investment that the state made where that investment was uncertain, and that investment was scrutinized. And here we are, 6 or 7 years later, and it's probably one of the most important and validated investments the state has ever made, not just locally in Buffalo, but in all of their economic development efforts over the last few decades. So I think that we started as a community to build enough credibility that we were going to follow through, that we had the personnel and we had the environment to be successful. And the fact that ESD was willing to do that, the fact that Wilson also believed in that, has created a place where interesting things can happen if we can just get a little bit of that momentum. And Mike's right that we have an incredible head start on other communities that are trying to figure this out on their own, and we just have to take advantage of that.
Yeah, do we have a head start? I believe that Buffalo and cities like Buffalo are in a race for relevance. There's no doubt about it, right? Doing research and preparation today, there's a lot of articles about Indy. Some of them are pretty amazing, 9 unicorns in the last 11 years. Imagine 9 ACVs in this community over a 10 or 15 year period. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal about a year ago where they said VCs used to think that Indianapolis was an emergency landing spot for planes flying back and forth from the coast. Now VCs, it's one of the fastest growing markets for VC investments in the world. So I guess this is kind of I'm going to take it up about 30,000 up to 30,000 feet. So why is the establishment of a tech ecosystem so important for cities like Indy and Buffalo? Why not something else? Why tech? Just help us understand why this is so important to Buffalo, that we get it right this time.
I can take why it's important. You talk about why it's important for Buffalo this time. It's for a couple different reasons. One, we're in a window of time where a decade ago there was a myopic focus on the legacy tech hubs, Bay Area in particular, but you also had Boston, you also had Seattle, et cetera. And there are a couple different reasons why the luster, has begun to wear off of those. And it's certainly because of the congestion, cost, churn of talent, all of those challenges that we oftentimes hear about. But it's also because tech has migrated. Tech has migrated from being about, kind of, as one person described to me, sort of the evolution of the data center, which has essentially been about the internet. And we went through a window of time where it was a very myopic focus on kind of direct-to-consumer, B2C sort of web application development. And that was the era of social media, et cetera. That was an era that was owned by the Bay Area. Well, now we're in an era where tech has migrated to the industries to every other industry. And it just so happens that those industries are predominantly headquartered in other places like Buffalo and Indianapolis. And so it becomes a question of not just building tech from scratch, it becomes adopting tech into what you're already good at. And so that's kind of why, that's one of the contributing reasons why this migration is happening and why it's both creating opportunity and you're seeing the momentum of other places around the country. Now, why it's important, is in part because, just as you described, there are certain jobs in certain industries that are disproportionately prosperity creating. And tech is one of those. And it's one of those that it's particularly accessible. If you're going to be some of the other prosperity creating industries, as Eric referenced, require a significant amount of education, of infrastructure capital investment, and those are barriers to accessibility. Well, tech bucks that trend, right? It is nearly ubiquitous. The jobs are much more readily accessible without the long investment into education, and also they're capital light. So it creates lots of opportunity for other places to be able to do it, which begets more competition, but also more opportunity. I do believe, though, that we're in an era where it's going to be winner takes most, and that the regions, the metros that get it right first will win more than the ones that get it later. Because the other thing that we know about tech and a lot of these jobs is they're relatively fungible. You can, with a laptop, and a person in a laptop can pick up and move just about wherever they want to. And the companies that employ those individuals, particularly now that remote work is so generally accepted now due to COVID, are particularly liquid, right? And so places that are laggards in getting there will disproportionately lose their entrepreneurs, they'll lose their talent, and they'll lose their legacy industry assets because they'll get cannibalized by the other places that got it first.
So, Eric, I want your perspective. I said a second, but you've taken me to a little bit of a different place. So, talk to me like Austin and Indianapolis and Salt Lake City and Buffalo. And you're right, people are very mobile in this space. But talk about the personality of those communities. What do you see in the people in the communities? I mean, what do you see that's similar that we can look to capitalize on here in Buffalo?
Well, each of those different places. I mean, I spent a year in the Salt Lake City area because that's where the company that acquired mine is located. And I spent some time in Austin and the Bay Area and Seattle and some of those other places. Each of them have their own unique reasons. I'll just hone in on Indianapolis and Buffalo. I think what's been evident to me in the kind of the conversations with Eric and the tour that I've gotten today and the discussions we've had with the board, and what is true about Indianapolis is that when you drill down into what attracts people and what keeps people, is that they're not physical assets, they're human assets. And so Indianapolis, and it sounds much like Buffalo, Indianapolis is uniquely a human phenomenon. Indianapolis is, to my knowledge, is the largest city the largest city in the U.S. on a non-navigable river. So whereas every other city in the country, when you think about the major city, whether it's a New York City or a Chicago or a San Francisco or an L.A., all of them, those were cities that they're there because there was going to be a city that grew there. There was a harbor there. There was a bend in the river or a fork in the river, and as a result, there were natural congregations for commerce. And so naturally, there were going to be people and businesses that hubbed there by accident. Indianapolis is a uniquely human phenomenon. It's there because the early settlers of the area and the early government leadership said, we're going to put our capital city right there. But not because it was naturally a commerce hub. And subsequently, the major things that kind of begot the identity of the place and the economic assets of the place were, again, because of human intervention. So the reason why the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, the greatest spectacle in racing, the largest single sporting event in the world is in Indianapolis, is because Carl Fisher went out at the advent of the automobile and said, this pasture land out here, I'm going to make it the greatest spectacle in racing. I'm going to build a major tourist attraction that's going to draw people from all across the world. And he and a group of others did it. The reason why it's one of the greatest sporting cities in the country and has these amazing venues and interconnection of convention centers and sporting facilities and hotels, et cetera, and draw so many, hundreds of thousands of people from all across the country, is because back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, a group of civic and business leaders banded together and said, we're going to make this the amateur sports capital of the world. And they got the NCAA to move their headquarters here and the Colts to move here and built hundreds of millions of dollars in infrastructure. And so I didn't even grow up in Indiana.
Olympics too, right? One of the U.S. Olympic Committee housed in Indianapolis, I thought.
Yeah, so a bunch of the governing bodies for all the major sports bodies are there too. And I didn't even grow up in Indiana. I grew up in Illinois. I actually grew up on a farm in Illinois. So I'm like, my parents barely know what I do. But what attracted me to stay into Indianapolis was that human aspect. It was a gritty group of individuals that said, we are going to build a place here and we are going to make it exceptional. And they've done it. And it's a mix of hard work ethic and grit, which we've talked about. It's entrepreneurship, industriousness, all those characteristics. And getting back to the kind of the core of your question, I sense that is a shared ethic here in Buffalo as well. That is largely not about the amenities that are in the place, but the people that are in the place. And I think ultimately that's what is. I believe that at a core, there are two types of people in the world. There are place consumers and there are place builders. And the people who are place consumers are the ones that want to go to a place to be able to consume all the things that are there. And then there are the people who what they really fundamentally get joy and satisfaction from, and the feeling of doing something worthwhile in their life is being part of building something. And the joy and satisfaction that comes from building a place is exceptionally attractive.
That's great, and I agree. As you know, I spent a lot of time in Indianapolis, and I do see great similarities between Indianapolis and Buffalo in terms of the people, the work ethic, the community, so on and so forth. So, Eric, look, we all know your reputation, your tireless commitment to tech. So I'm not going to ask you why tech versus something else, but just based on some of the high level things that we've heard so far, how is Buffalo positioned today to sustain its position in this race for relevancy in the tech space, in your opinion?
Well, we're well positioned, but we're certainly a generation behind Indianapolis. If you just sort of look back to what Mike has explained, Indy is at stage 3 when we are still at stage 2. And I think that the ACV example is actually instructive of that, right? ACV was started by a guy who went to Z80 with an idea and plugged it into some tech people. Those tech people came from M&T and other local tech shops. All those people were mentored and influenced by Jordy and Ronnie, right, who set up a place for those people to go. And they got added to by a bunch of advisors and people with resources and people with experience. And now, 4 or 5 years later, you have this huge company that employs 500-600 people locally and is going to, create some resources in people's pockets where they can invest in those other companies, right?
It's funny. We have to force ourselves to come back to that because, Jordy Levy and Ronnie Schreiber were actually doing this back in the late 90s, right? I mean, they actually got started when you guys got started, but for some reason, there was a big gap there. So I want to get back to that. Because,
and I think that's exactly my point, which is, now ACV has a network of people who have some cash because they've had a positive outcome. They also, and I say this often for people to really understand the impact of ACV, isn't the money. It's now there's 500 or 600 or 700 people who know how to do a startup. Like I actually noticed before I came in, there were a couple of my old Campus Labs colleagues here. Like when we started that company, there was Synacor and there was Campus Labs and there was Liaison, and those were the only people in Buffalo who knew what it was like to work at a startup. Now there's triple or quadruple that. And those people are going to leave and they're going to start their own companies, right? So when I look back at the journey of Indianapolis, they had a few small successes early, and then they had a couple of really big ones, and then those big ones spawned those 10 unicorns that you were talking about. Right, because of that arc of experience, because there were more resources in the community, because it wasn't 3 or 4 people in the city were the only people who knew the recipe. of how to create a startup. And that's, people ask me all the time, why are you doing this and why are you spending so much time in doing this? I feel like in a city of like Buffalo, where it's only so big and so few people know the recipe, if you know the recipe, you're sort of, it's beholden for you to keep cooking until more people know the recipe. And then once it starts expanding, people will get it on their own, and it'll sort of self-perpetuate and it'll grow organically. But until that time, we have to be explaining the recipe to people. So to answer your question, Indy is that one step advanced, where all of their people from those early successes have accomplished 2 or 3 additional successes on their own. And now you're not talking about 10 or 12 companies, you're talking about 50 or 60 companies.
So, Mike, you earlier on, you talked about recruitment. You guys are recruiting companies now to Indianapolis. Talk to us about how you're doing that, because I want to get into a discussion about, because the big challenge for, I think, all of us, even Indianapolis, is access to talent, right? I'm sure now that you guys are on the map and people talk about Indianapolis like they talk about Washington and Boston and LA and San Francisco, that your top talent's being recruited out of Indianapolis. So talk to me about your recruitment process. What are you guys doing? What's your 43 North, so to speak, and what are you guys doing to evolve tech talent in Indianapolis?
I'll start with the talent side, because that's what we got, the company hunting side of it. So one of the first priorities was that we started on supply talent. That was the thing coming in that I said I wanted to create. I wanted to endow this place with a competitive advantage around talent supply. And so we built a suite of programs to really harness, for example, Indianapolis, and I think I don't know what the number is for Buffalo, but I know that it's a big number as well. Within a 3-hour radius of Indianapolis, there are over 350,000 college students that are enrolled. And some of them at some of the top business and engineering schools in the country. So you've got Purdue University, Indiana University, Notre Dame, University of Illinois, Ohio State, University of Chicago, University of Michigan, just when you go around that 3-hour radius. And so, as is often talked about, you look at Big Ten, Midwest, kind of those, there's just a lot of good universities with a high volume of talent, a lot of engineering as well. And so as I stepped into the role, I realized the bridge between those universities and our tech ecosystem was actually pretty shaky. It was totally dependent on employers' initiative, and there were only a few of them that had really enough scale and size and sophistication to be really doing it very well on their own. And so we decided to kind of co-opt that. Let's build a program that can do this on behalf of the community and a whole cadre of companies. And so fast forward to today, the first program that we created was called the extern program, XTERN. Think about it like a primo internship program. And so we recruited. We went to knock down the barriers, to all the primary barriers to being able to pipeline in university talent. First of them, which was, where are the jobs? Which companies are hiring? That's difficult to kind of aggregate. How do you get to the talent? There are all these universities, all these career fairs. It's all this time to try to find these students and interact with them. And then the third was, where are they going to live? If they're not from here, what are they going to do for housing? And then the fourth was, if they're not from here, outside of the 8 to 5, how are we going to ensure that they have a good experience and they want to stay? And so we created a program to tackle all those problems and kit it into one program. We call it extern. And now we've attracted over 10,000 college student applicants from almost every state in the country. Just this past year, we had over 2,000 applicants from 222 universities and 43 home states that applied for the program. 2/3 of them are going into software engineering, data science, cybersecurity, IT, all kind of tech-related roles. And we've brought over 1,000 of them to Indianapolis and placed them in like 165 different companies, ranging from Fortune 500s to startups. So we created a supply line that was then, we now have built an abundance of supply of talent that then became merchandisable.
Okay, so just hold on the recruitment. So Eric, how do we address that problem?
Well, it's funny that you say that.
I think I know the answer.
It's funny how he told that story, because the extern program, I found out about that in Indy before I knew Mike, and even before I knew what TechPoint was. I heard about that program, and I'm like, I got to find out who's doing that program, because that program sounded like tailor-made for something that we can do in Buffalo, and tailor-made for the idea of if you can get a few hundred college kids to move to Buffalo for the summer and you put them up in the right spot and you do programming collectively with all of them, they're now all going to want to be in Buffalo as a group. Like, imagine if you took kids from Cleveland and Pittsburgh and Rochester and, maybe even one day, Toronto or Waterloo that are all technically inclined, and you brought them to Buffalo and you put them up in the dorms at Buff State, which aren't being used over the summer, and they're going and getting, great experience during the day at a local tech employer, and then at night they're all together. Right? And they're all becoming friends with one another. And they're all getting job offers at the end of the summer. And now it's not, how do you get 2 or 3 people of that age to move to Buffalo? Now you have like this peer pressure factor where now 50 or 60 kids are saying, I'm taking that job when it gets offered to me when I graduate. And now you have, 100 kids or 150 kids. And what that does to a downtown, or what that does to commerce, or what that does to urban living. It's like, if you're a Buffalonian who's lived here for 10 or 15 years, it's almost incalculable, like the impact that something like that could have. Yeah. So anyway, to finish the story, I said to them, I got to find out how to do this extern thing. So I was on the phone with the person at TechPoint who does extern, and she starts telling me about all this other stuff that TechPoint does. And I'm like, this is crazy. How do we not have something like this? And that became the knowledge for me that TechPoint had the secret sauce to figure all this out. So to answer your question, we're going to have to do a lot of the things that TechPoint has done in order to advance those agendas, because they're happening in other cities, and they're also happening in other cities very successfully, in cities that don't necessarily have anything more to offer than we do. Right. And I think that Buffalo for decades has been its own enemy as being so self-conscious about what's happening here or what's not happening here. And we just got to start doing this stuff.
Yeah. I'll share an insight, because I think it would probably be fairly true in Buffalo as well. But we've been tracking over the course of 7-8 years, both outcomes of those individuals that go through extern, and not only in where they end up, but also their sentiment about the place. And so almost half of them, when surveyed coming into the program, say they had little to no impression of Indianapolis and the tech ecosystem here. They just didn't, not a bad impression, not a good impression, just really no impression. And when they come into the program, only 25% said that there was any likelihood that they would live and work in Indy after graduation. After the program, when offered a job, over 3/4 of them accept. And so there are a couple storylines in that. One of them is a huge deficit in brand awareness. And then the second is that when they experience it, you can significantly move the needle. We're talking about a 50% delta over the course of one summer.
Yeah, that's
in ultimately where they're going to end up.
I think, for Buffalo, given the pace of change and the competition, we're going to have to do other things in addition to the things that you talked about. And I know you're working on those things, and you'll have some exciting announcements for our community soon, hopefully. What about STEM? I mean, like, when you look at what happened in Utah, and you look at probably one of the most advanced tech-enabled workforces in the country is in Utah, because someone decided 15 years ago to add coding and software development to what they teach grammar school kids. I mean, is that happening in Indiana now? I mean, certainly we know the challenges we face here with the Buffalo school system, with all due respect to anybody affiliated with the Buffalo school systems. But I think there's short-term things that you can do, but I think the long-term is we just got to come to the reality that we got to start teaching our young people as early as possible about tech. Would you agree?
Yeah, I agree. And we have a governor right now that workforce is top priority, and one of those, there's been a whole roster of things that he has really put into place, but one of them is computer science in every high school around the state. So that's now a requirement, and now the schools are scrambling to actually enable that to happen. That's the challenge. Is in then the kind of operational actualization of that, but the policy mandate is there, and so it's causing the whole system to now have to move in that direction.
Interesting, very interesting. So I want to talk in the remaining 10 minutes or so that we have about collaboration. I think one of the things that we've struggled with, quite frankly, is leadership in the past was very closed-minded. We've had plenty of opportunities to transform this community, and I think we've swung and we missed every time. Matter of fact, I can tell you, and Eric, correct me if I'm wrong, or anybody else, Larry Rubin, I saw Larry here. I mean, 3 years ago, there were people talking about chopping off the top 10 floors of this building, believe it or not. That was the solution to fixing this eyesore. You can imagine the thought that went into that. But what's plagued us is we've had a difficulty getting people to want to work together from multiple constituencies: politicians, economic development people, private sector, big company CEOs. How did you make that work? How did you get past that challenge?
When I came into this role, it's not that Indianapolis is immune by any means. Actually, one of the first orders of business when I came into this role is that we were facing a prospective generational divide within our tech community. So, one of the things we've had to do is expand the tent of the tech community multiple times. And in the first case, it was because there was the kind of the old guard tech community leadership, and then the new guard, younger companies, startups that were coming up, and they were coming out of different generations, saw the world a little bit differently, and they were heading in different directions. And we had to build a tent that was big enough, and a vision that was big enough, and egos that were low enough in order to get everybody kind of into the tent together. So that is certainly a risk and a concern. It's ultimately, what you just described is an example of a failure of vision, right? And I think what ultimately happens in too many places is that it's a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. And the risk is that when you get into a fixed mindset, you start seeing the world as a pie, and it just becomes a question of how you carve it up. And that's a world where you end up living in a world of scarcity. The cultural imperative in doing this kind of work is that you have to create a culture of abundance. You have to create a belief that there is a future that is different and bigger and more prosperous for a wider array of people, and that then you can rally people behind that vision, because otherwise it just becomes a question of the world becomes finite, prosperity is restricted, and it becomes a matter of figuring out who's going to get what. And that's not a recipe for success.
Can we build a culture of abundance here, Eric, in your opinion? Are we on our way to doing it?
We are, and I think that we have to.
I love that expression. It's great.
I think that we have to. I think that is the sort of the last piece of the puzzle that we haven't even embarked on yet, which is creating an inclusive tech community, one that's in every neighborhood, one that has unlimited opportunity no matter where you went to school or what part of the city that you lived in or what your educational background is. Those are the things that are going to go even further in changing our city, in making the tech community more accessible. I think that's really what Mike's talking about. Over a period of time, the vision has been inaccessible to people who wanted to jump on the train and participate. You had to be of a certain ilk, you had to be connected in a certain way to participate, and that's not going to work. And the thing that's so special about tech is that you can come up to speed pretty fast. You can learn, you can get a job in a company at a relatively low or middle area in the sort of the way that the company is defined technically, and you can prove yourself and all of a sudden see yourself in a very influential, important position very quickly, and the wages that match that responsibility. Right, sure. And we need to showcase that opportunity to people who don't even realize that exists.
I would posit there as you're thinking about doing this, and you are building a community and a culture in that community, and you're having to think about the intangible. How do you create the ethic that you want in that community? You've got to build the supports and expand the tent to make it accessible. You have to empower the entrepreneurs and the intrapreneurs, and you have to turn up the heat. And the first two, evident, right? You just got to put the necessary supports in place so the people who want to go do it have the capacity to go do it, and they feel like it's accessible for them to go do it. Yeah, empowering the entrepreneurs is removing the constraints and the dialogue that tells people that you're too young, it's not your turn yet, or that you're crazy or you're thinking too big. removing that calcification out of the system that holds that opportunity down. It's going to be messy. There are going to be mistakes. There are going to be failures, but that's part of the process, and you just have to embrace it. And then the last is turning up the heat, and that's just constantly keeping the bar, the horizon, the expectation set far enough out into the future, because what can happen, and one of the challenges that I would pose to this group is, don't let the early successes become success. It is easy to become complacent and satisfied with an ACV going public, right? And to have a lot of kind of celebration and patting on the back that, like, hey, we've arrived, right? And I think that's even something that I'm aware of in Indianapolis that we can be subject to. You can't let that happen, because then you'll plateau at that point and you'll never realize the potential.
Yeah, I think our community has really responded well to ACV. I think it's because of the leadership. We got some great people leading that company. They're incredibly dedicated to the community. I think that we celebrate, and I think we springboard off of that. I'm just curious, before we get into failures and then kind of the future, what are the cities that we should be watching for? I mean, who's our competition out there? Eric, maybe you can give us some perspective on that. Who else is trying to do this right now?
Well, I think most, mid-tier cities are putting effort towards this. So whether you're Indianapolis or you're Kansas City or you're Portland, like that ilk, or Buffalo, I put in that category, that tier of city, everyone's trying to do something. It's just a matter of how much is leadership, resources, momentum, who's going to be able to pick up steam fast enough to differentiate themselves. And, I end up on the stage with Mike because Indy's done such a fantastic job and has had all those successes, but they've also found a way to tell that story. And, in Buffalo, we have to continue to tell that story because, the narrative has been written on the city on a variety of ways, not all of them complementary. So we're changing minds in addition to creating narrative. It's a little bit more work, but it's definitely worth it, and it's definitely attainable.
So I guess more from a macro perspective, going forward, what do you think we should be thinking about, like based on what you know so far, what you've learned, what you've observed, your past experiences, your relationship and with Eric? What should we be thinking about going forward?
Yeah, I think we talked about this in the board meeting earlier today. You have to have what I've learned about coming from the startup environment to this ecosystem building environment is in startup culture, it's the mentality is focus. Narrow your focus and find that window of opportunity and run through the chute and maximize. But it's about not getting too spread out. Ecosystem building is tricky because I have this graphic of kind of the visual embodiment of an ecosystem, and it's talent that begets innovation and entrepreneurship, that with capital grows companies, that yields more talent, and then you have community that's a ring around that, and then you have kind of policy and governance around that, and then you have promotion around that to amplify stories and pull more resources in. And so it's you kind of you constantly have to have a multitude of plates spinning, because if you start a whole bunch of startups, but you don't have sufficient capital, then they're not going to get up and off the ground. If you have a whole bunch of talent, but you don't have jobs for them, they're not going to stay. If you have a whole bunch of companies that are creating jobs, but you don't have talent, then the companies aren't going to stay either or be successful. And so you have to have a balance in that ecosystem. And so one thing that I would say is be cognizant of the balance and be sufficiently informed about where you stand today and where you stand on each of those ingredients so you can make the informed decisions about what you need to do next. The second is you've got the startup and the scale-up ecosystem is critically important because those are going to be critical job creators in the future. And then the third is your incumbent employers, particularly your largest ones, take an M&T, for example, really really deep engagement with those employers because one of the things that we talked about today, there's this hidden trap as you do all this work to kind of attract talent, train talent, prepare them for the jobs. And then you have all these employers that say, hey, we're looking for people, we need to hire, right? What we've learned is then we've brought supply together with demand, facilitated a marketplace for them to be able to transact. And what we've learned is that marketplace is messy. It operates more like a flea market than it does Amazon. And so it's highly kind of inefficient, and it requires a really good understanding and agreement from the employers and a commitment from the employers to not just hire that 3 to 7 year talent that has been through all of these different programs and came from this employer prior, but is going to have is going to be committed to that non-traditional talent that has the skill, has the grit. They're going to bet on that individual because in the absence of those committed employers that are able to, that are willing to pull through that non-traditional talent, you're never going to grow the talent, the tech ecosystem, the talent pool quickly enough to meet the need, and then everything else is for naught.
That's fantastic. We've got a couple of minutes here before I thank these two amazing individuals for their time. Is there any questions from the audience anyone has for Mike or Eric? Please stand up and scream. You go first. Yeah, Freddie, go ahead. Yep.
Mike, my name is Tim Lay. I'm with the University of Buffalo.
Hi, Tim.
My question is, has the state of Indiana Department of Education gone into the school systems, K through 16 or K through 12 maybe, and looked at curriculum to the extent to where tech could become part of gen ed?
There's a whole effort with Department of Education, a few other affiliated agencies to create more alignments in K-16 to reform our CTE. I don't know if you call it CTE here, college and technical education programs at the K-12 level, to create requirements that students, leave high school, for example, with a plan and some work experience, all those kinds of things. So yes, I think, and this is the conversation that we'll get into with the TechBuffalo board tomorrow, what has been absent, and I think is an area that we are now focusing in, is that generally those efforts are supply side led. They're led by education or they're led by government. And that is like pushing a rope uphill. And so what we are now doing is mobilizing the demand side, the employer side, to more with greater level of definition and a greater level of consensus, articulate what are the occupations in tech and what are the competencies expected for them. Because with the articulation of that specification, then the whole rest of the system can build backward from that. But what typically happens is that responsibility gets handed to, that's a government problem, or that's an education problem. But I have a high degree of empathy for the education system in particular, because they're trying to throw darts at a dartboard that's kind of constantly moving around. And so there has to be enough of an alignment between the employer side and the education side in order for them to kind of code to the same standards, right? They're just oftentimes missing each other. The inspiration for me was studying the Swiss system. The Swiss system has a high degree of alignment, their apprenticeship system and their vocational system is the representation of that. The U.S. In the U.S., we've created an expectation of college for all, an anticipation that is the singular path for success. And so as a result, in Indiana, for example, almost 70% of high school students embark upon college. The yield on that is materially lower. But in the Swiss system, it is the exact opposite. 70% of students actually exit their equivalent of high school and go into down a vocational track. And there's then about 25% or so actually go down the university track. And so it creates and there's equal dignity and relatively equal compensation, and also a high level of specification. If you go down the vocational track, you start in this apprenticeship, and you're going to get a diploma at the end of your apprenticeship that says this demonstrates that I have these competencies. And as a result, that creates currency in the economy, that employers say, oh, you came out of the apprenticeship program? Well, then I can expect that you can do this job. And people have then the ability to move around in the economy as well. And so even though our world is different, than Switzerland's, for example, it was an eye-opener to me to see what alignment between the employer base and the education base can do, and as a result, how much of a productive economy it can create.
Time for one more. I think we had something down here in the first row. Do you have a question? Please, thank you.
My question for Eric. What are some hurdles you're expecting in the coming future, and how to contact them?
Well, I think the hurdles are many. I'm working on a project right now to try to address the equity and inclusion angle of tech, and that project has allowed me to collaborate with an unprecedented number of local agencies who care deeply about this community. We're gonna find out very soon whether that can scale over a long period of time, whether we can gather enough momentum for people to see the signs of success and want to double down on their investments, of whether we can have other companies emulate the type of thing that M&T has done, whether we can inspire more people to go out on their own and accomplish something like ACV has accomplished. Like, a lot of times it's the past events that have informed your ability to repeat them, going forward. And it'll be interesting to see whether this community can take some of those lessons and try to proactively and intentionally and methodically attack the things that have worked in the past. Our history has said that that is a challenge in this community. I'm trying to create a new history, and I think that that is attainable. And I know that there's an army of people like-minded that are of our age and our demographic who think differently about this community. And I'm hopeful that that they'll be able to execute, because I think that the raw materials, as Mike has said, all the attributes that should be able to deliver a reimagined, prosperous city 20 or 25 years from now exist. We'll just see if we're able to put it together in time.
That's great, Eric. So, Mike, I just have to say, what a fabulous opportunity for us to have you here, to have you engaged in what we're trying to do. I think you brought a great deal of clarity around, I think we're doing the right things. And hearing you say some of the things that you said today is very reassuring to me. My job is to knock down barriers for these guys, and just wonderful to have you here. And we hope this is not the last time. I don't believe that it will be. So please watch our success. And Eric,
Thank you.
As our chief volunteer, tech volunteer in this community, chief tech volunteer officer, I mean, it's amazing the amount of time that you're spending. We're so lucky to have you. I'm very grateful for your efforts to put this together today. Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for two outstanding speakers today. Thank you.